Hey everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful Wednesday evening. Tammy was going to try, but she is in the middle of the ocean at the moment on a ferry, and so she is not going to be able to join us tonight. So you're stuck with me, beautiful me. And I hope you've been having a wonderful Wednesday. And I just wanted to check to make sure I was live. So kind of this week, I kind of wanted to talk, I guess, about being a functioning adult, decision making. I don't know. It's beautiful when you're on a healing journey, and it's beautiful of when the veil's been removed and you just see so much that is really wrong with people. And this week's post, a lot that I've been doing have been about really kids trapped in adult bodies. That just because we expect a person to be adult because by their physical size, that we assume that they're adult, but we don't look at what makes up that adult, what is making up that human being, that human reaction, that emotional reaction, that mental reaction. And really just honestly, how many of us just walk around with all of our traumas on our shoulders and we really don't even realize it. I didn't realize it. I basically got called out on it. I got called out, and that's really what started my healing journey because, I was honestly naive in, my early life because of the fact that, I thought I handled things well. I thought that I was doing good. I thought, and I didn't even realize that I was just portraying the same patterns in life, just slightly different. There's things that were from my past that I wasn't carrying on, but, like the emotional outbursts. I was kind of known for that. I always kind of felt like I was a soda bottle. Take like a 2 liter and, just keep shaking it, just keep pouring everything into it, just keep doing everything. And basically, we just get to this point where we explode. And, we can have vile crap come out of our mouth on that when we do that, but we don't even see the errors in that. We don't because it's such a common thing that people do. And really, it's emotional immaturity. And I was very emotionally immature because I didn't know how to regulate my emotions. Growing up in an abusive home, growing up with narcissistic parents, I always was, walking on eggshells. I mean, you never knew when, my dad would lose it. You just never knew. I mean, you could just be sitting there. And like, I have a memory of one time where my sister, myself, my mom and dad, we were all in the living room and actually having, like a decent night. It'd been an okay day. And we are all kind of joking. And all of a sudden, my mom said something and my sister rolled her eyes at my dad. I mean, at my mom for the comment that she had made. And my dad lost it. He chased her up the stairs as she was running out, dragged her down the stairs, and, just started beating the crap out of her just because she rolled her eyes. Those were the type of things that, I lived with on a daily basis. You had no idea what was going to set that man off. I mean, I used to ask my parents all the time, like, why did you even have children? Like, and growing up, always like, what is my purpose? Why am I even here? Like, I'm just your punching bag. Like, you don't want to have kids. Why did you have kids? I mean, did you just feel like you needed to have kids because that's what other people wanted you to do? Well, if you don't want kids, don't have kids. And, that was really, tough growing up with that mentality. But going back onto of, it got to a point in my life where when I had, my wake up, I had the veil removed from me. And, it took someone, in a way, really for the first time in my life, like showing me love. Now, I was not healed at that time, and so I was very defensive about the things that that person was saying to me, but they were at the same time things that I needed to hear. They were what I needed because they really spoke to my subconscious. They really spoke to of like, hey, this isn't right. And again, I was defensive. And one of the things that you need to realize is when you are speaking to a person and you call them out on some type of behavior or telling them how you feel, if they get defensive on it, well, they're not healed and they're emotionally immature. But you have to get to a point in your life where, you have to make decisions. To be a fully functioning adult, you have to make decisions. And sometimes those decisions can be really hard. Where my biggest decision kind of came when I sat back and I really started analyzing my life, and I realized that my life was a run on sentence. I literally constantly was just like, and then, and then, and then, and then. I mean, how many of you guys can relate to that? How many people, like, when you sit back and you really think of your stories of your past, where you're like, well, and then that happened, and then that happened, and then that happened, and that happened. And I was basically done with that. I was like, I wanted a paragraph, I wanted a sentence, I wanted a statement in my life, and I didn't have that. And so I had to really reflect on myself. I had to sit down. Well, how is this change going to be? Because the fact is that my family didn't see anything wrong with how things were. I was the black sheep in the family. I would always call them out on everything that was done and how things were going. Hey, Sarah. On it, and that was one of the reasons why I was hated. My nickname growing up was Mouth because I always called them out on things, and then it became Wayward. I was the wayward daughter. My name was never referred to as Megan. It was Wayward. You are the wayward one. And actually, I used to take that as an insult because I didn't really understand of the insult that it was supposed to be given to me. But now I look at it and like, that's a compliment. That's a huge compliment because that they couldn't control me in different ways. And like, I called my dad like out on the abuse. Actually, a few years ago, which made like one of the really hard decisions that I had to make is that, I tried to make peace with them. I tried to, grow with them. We were older, so like maybe we could sit down and we could talk about, what happened in, our house, what happened in that. And so I called my dad out on the physical abuse in our house, and my father's comment was, who gives a fuck that I toss you around like a rag doll? And it was kind of like, wow, really? Like, all these years later, there's not an I'm sorry, there's not a, I'm really sorry, I didn't know. But the fact is that he still doesn't know how to regulate his emotions. He's, still impulsive. He can't make a decision, and that's, one of that's his issues onto it. And, I really had to sit down and I had to make a decision that, if I wanted that run-on sentence to stop in my life, I had to make hard decisions. I had to finally be an adult and say, I'm not going to allow this anymore. And so I cut ties with my family. If that was going to be their mental take on things, that was going to be their defense of coming at me of who cares? Well, I care. But that was the reality, is that I grew up not mattering. I grew up not being important. I grew up not being a priority. I was there to regulate my father's emotions. I was there to be his punching bag. I was there. And the fact, though, that I was an adult now with children, not only an adult, but now I'm a mother, I was still expected to play that role. I was supposed to allow my children to witness this behavior. I was supposed to, just because he was my father. And for my mother, because, my mother didn't do anything. She never stopped any of the physical abuse. She would just sit there. I mean, now she adopted many of his ways into physical. She was more of the psychological abuse. She played up the word games to kind of break you down even more. She kind of joined him in it. But, the decision had to be made. And I remember one time, like, after I kind of said, I'm not doing this anymore, my children have kind of called out, why do you guys act this way? Why do you guys do this? Because of the fact that how I was raising my children was not the same as I grew up into. And so my children, even at a young age, they already witnessed that. They already saw that difference into it. And, they started making comments about how, they didn't like being around them. They were scared. And, it kind of flashed back to, like, everything that I grew up in. And so, like, I was like, I'm not coming, to your house. I'm not going to, if you cannot, for the little you interact with us, if you can't be respectful for an hour, then I'm not having anything to do, and I'm not going to put my children into that situation either. And then it used to be, well, just go out to dinner with us. Your dad can't act that way in public. Yeah, I can. He may not be able to throw the punch and stuff, but he can still make the smart ass comments. He can still, verbally and mentally and emotionally break you down. He can still do all of that in a public place. I mean, think you can sit there and talk quietly and sit there and cuss someone out, and no one in the restaurant even knows. And so it was, why am I going to subject myself? Hey, Rashida. Why am I going to subject myself to that? Why am I subjecting my kids to this? And so you have to make decisions. You have to, and I know some people are like, you need to heal, and it is healing, because you have to learn how to forgive. I forgive my parents because I understand that they just didn't know how. They didn't know how to do any of this, but it still doesn't mean I have to suffer. It still doesn't mean that I have to endure any of it, because they choose not to. That's their choice. That's their decision. That's their immaturity. That's their mental instability. That is their choice. So you know what? I am going to move on. And so really, you have to make that decision. The best decision of my life was cutting my family out. No ties whatsoever. And let me tell you, that was hard. And, I really did have a roller coaster of emotions doing it, because of the fact that, and as a child, you learn how to be a people pleaser. And I was always in charge of being that person, of regulating. And so it was really hard. And, the threats, because, again, I'm Mouth and the wayward one, don't think that I didn't tell my parents what I was going to do, that, you weren't going to have contact with me, therefore you weren't going to have contact with your grandkids, and I thought, giving that threat they would be like, okay, we're going to change, we're going to see. And instead it became more attacks on me. It became more of, oh my God, they called like stuff out that I did like when I was 5. And then like I called out like, oh, I was 6 and you took a baseball bat to me, a metal baseball bat. Not sure how that's equivalent, but I even, in ways of trying to keep the peace, I kind of broke down to their immature and their emotional, because of the fact that they were my parents. And even though these things happened, I still wanted a relationship. I wanted them to be the people that I believed they could be. Not that they ever showed me that they could be these people by their actions and their words or anything. It was the people that because of who I am, and I always looked at it that, I'm this amazing person. I have this amazing large heart, and I came from them. There has to be that somewhere inside of them. Like, where is it? And like, how can I get to it? And then, after that just roller coaster of emotions, of just that up and down of it, it was finally like, I'm done. And, my parents even gaslighting, tried to be like, your kids won't know their grandparents. Look what you're doing to them. Really? What am I doing to them? I'm teaching them that these type of behaviors are not appropriate, that these type of behaviors are not acceptable. I am setting boundaries. I am telling you what I will tolerate and what I will not tolerate, and you choose not to respect that. And you have to be able to do that. And even when it comes to your family, you have to set those boundaries, because let's face it, the people that hurt you the most are the ones that you expect to love you the most. The ones. And why do we do that? Just because society says so? That really doesn't mean crap. I mean, society says a lot of stuff that, you're supposed to do this or that or have that or that. Why? I mean, really, that just keeps us in the rat race. It keeps us on that hamster wheel of always lacking, always wanting this or wanting that, when why are we not stepping out on our own? Why are we not stepping out into our own paths? And I think that, more people need to sit down with who they are, because I don't think many of us know who we are. We so live in our past, and we can't change our past. We cannot do it. But I think some people get confused on the healing journey, because it's, live in the present moment, live in the present moment. But really, you have to go back into the past, and you have to learn how to be able to go back into the past to be the observer. It's not that you can change anything, but you have to become aware of your own actions. How did you behave? How did you have your emotional outbursts? How did you handle these situations? Could you have handled things differently? Could you have done this or that? Because again, you can't change it, but you have to learn from it. And, I've said this before, and Tammy's in my podcast before about, being the test. The fact of the matter is, say you cheat on a test in, say, high school, something important, like, say, mathematics. Okay? Well, mathematics builds off of everything onto it. So if you miss chapter 1, there's no way in hell that you're going to know how to do chapter 4, because of the fact that it's all an equation. And really, if you think about it, and if you're on the spiritual path, what is life? It's about numerology, it's, connections, it's sound, it's frequencies, all of that. And so it all goes together. So, but if you didn't get the information on chapter 1, chapter 4, well, most people, what they do is we cheat. We just, we get the cliff notes, we go on, and we kind of just do half-ass onto it. We just get by. Well, that's what you're doing in real life. And what you have to do is you have to go back. You got to go back to chapter 1. You got to pull that book out. You got to put out, and you can't blame anyone because they didn't teach you. When you become an adult, you cannot blame anyone else for the things that you did not learn as a child. And don't get me wrong, I did it for years. But that was my excuse. That was, completely, purely my excuse to justify what I was choosing to do, and then it was that I had that wake-up call. I had that veil of, if I want change, I have to be that change. I have to be that person to do this. No one's doing it for you. You have to do it. Now, I am a mental health wellness coach. I am trained I have certifications and I have a diploma. I'm also trained within traumas and disassociation and psychotic disorders, hypnotherapy and EMDR. But I started out, psychology, studying it's always been my passion. And then, but the chakras, sound, crystals, and all of that, and Reiki, and how it all goes together. But you have to step back, and you have to become that observer, and you have to make those decisions. Because if you aren't making those decisions, you are just riding the wheel. You're not making any decisions. You can't go right or left. You're not taking any chances in life. You're just letting life deal its hand to you. And so when life isn't going how you want it right now, go look in the mirror. It's because of you. And, some people might be getting offensive as to what I'm saying onto it, but that's one thing about working with me, is that I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I'm not your enabler. It's the hard facts that we need to hear of, well, why did you do that? Those questions of why, and I can't answer those whys for you, but I can guide you as to, okay, well, maybe I need to think about this a little differently. Maybe, I need to look at it differently, because it is all about perception. That is one thing in life. So you can either choose your perception of pain and suffering. You can choose to live within that. And let me ask you, how are you doing? How are you doing right now in life? Reliving constantly that pain, wearing it on your shoulders. How are your relationships? How are your relationship with your friends? How are your relationships with, your romantic partners? How are your relationships with your kids onto that? Are they learning to blame? Because they learn how we teach them onto it. So, like I posted a post the other day about, don't ever underestimate a survivor. A survivor may look weak in so many aspects, but, for like myself, don't ever underestimate, because my choice is to live in love, because that is who I am. That is who God made me to be. God made me to be a loving being. But I grew up in a hateful environment. I grew up in a destructive environment. I grew up where if I wanted to cut you with my tongue, I could cut you down I could make you feel that little small if I wanted to, because that was what I was raised with. If I wanted to throw a punch at you, I was beat every day of my life. Every day it was a smack, a hit, a punch. That's what I dealt with every day. You don't think I didn't learn how to throw a punch? You know, when it comes down to mental and verbal and emotional abuse, you don't think that I can't combine the combination of those insults, that passive aggressive, that gaslighting? You don't think that I can't do that? I can. So don't ever look at a survivor and think that they're weak because they choose not to do these things. But the fact of the matter is we know exactly what it does to a person. We lived it. And so we choose to rise above, and that goes into the frequencies. But again, it comes down to decisions. Your choice. Are you going to retaliate, or are you going to rise above? Are you going to let it go? Are you going to release it? Or are you going to hold on to it and let it eat you up inside and destroy you? Because guess what? Your abuser is not bothered by it. Your abuser is laughing at you. They're happy. You know, that's the sad part, is that most of the time when you get into, especially like a narcissist, which both my parents were and my ex-husband, you know, they look at many things of what they witnessed as to what they did, and they're happy with themselves. And it's sick. It's sick that someone, you know, is happy doing that to another person, but not everyone wants what's best for you. Not everyone is out for your best interest. And you are the only person who knows what's best for you. But we don't listen to our bodies. We are way too much in our minds. And so you have to really get back, because that comes down to the deregulated nervous systems, you know, of how does your body react? Like when you're triggered, like what expressions, what happens within your body before you have your outburst? You know, a lot of people don't even recognize that. A lot of people don't even know how that feels because, well, one, as a kid growing up in an abusive environment, you didn't have time to regulate your own emotions, and you certainly didn't know how to recognize your own emotions, because you become hypervigilant onto other people's. You become very sensitive to the energies that are in the room. You become very sensitive as to what is happening around you versus rather what is happening with inside of you. And so we really have to stop. We have to stop, and we have to take a break. We have to learn boundaries. Boundaries were a very hard thing for me to learn how to do, because of the fact that I was always that person giving, and always wondering why nothing was ever given back to me. Why? And, you know, I drained me, you know, and I literally almost drained the life out of me about 4 years ago onto it, and I had nothing to give. I was completely depleted. My body was actually literally shutting down on me. You know, I was procedures. I had tumors forming in my stomach because of stress, everything like that. My body actually was shutting down. Like, I was actually diagnosed with that. I don't remember the exact terminology of it right now. But it was like, I'm not ready to die. And I told the doctors that, like, I was like, I'm going to be completely fine. And that's when I had my wake-up call, because I made that decision that this was no longer going to be my life, that this story, this past, this run-on sentence, this was not me. This was the life that I gave the pen to other people in my life, and they were writing it. They were writing my story. They had control over me. They had control over every aspect of my being, who I was, how I reacted, everything, and I was done, and I was fed up with it. And I took back that pen. And now, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, manifestations in the spiritual world. And a lot of people get frustrated with that because of the fact that, you know, it doesn't happen quickly. Well, how old are you? The fact is, in many ways, we manifested everything that happened within our past, you know, whether you unconsciously or consciously are aware of it. But, you know, our thoughts are very powerful. So if you're constantly in that mindset of, you know, pain, sorrow, you know, I always lived with that the next shoe was going to fall off. You know, that was honestly how I lived my life. And guess what? It happened every time. So it was like I could never get excited about anything because I always knew something was, and then that was the story of my life. And so again, decisions. How do you become a fully functioning adult? The first is you need to make that decision. You have to have that desire. You have to have it. And you cannot go at it faint heart. You cannot go at it of that, I might do this. Oh, tomorrow. No, no. You have to sit down and you have to decide today's the day. Today's the day. And the reality of it is you will quickly see some shifts happen in your life. The day that you truly stand up and you say, I'm done, you will see things. Now, not all areas will become very clear. I mean, there's some things that, when I first set out on my healing journey 4 years ago, they have not manifested onto it. But I hold on to the fact that they will. They are manifesting, but the fact of the matter is that I had allowed so much to happen, and now that I got clear on what my desire was, what the life I wanted, how it was going to look, and I told the universe that, I know that the universe is working towards that. I know that the universe is, because you have to have faith. And that is one of the biggest things that you also have to have on a spiritual journey is faith. And one of my favorite sayings is that fear and faith both require faith in the unseen. So which one do you choose to feed? Do you choose to feed fear? That, oh, I'm going to do this, but it's not going to work out. Why am I even bothering? Well, of course, it's not going to happen. You don't believe. You don't have faith into it. Or are you going to be, you know what? I have faith. And yes, you do have to do, some actions. You got to put forth a little effort into it. But then the reality is that really once you set that mind to that this is how it's going to be, the universe is there to work for us. It works for us to create these things. You don't need to know how. You have to release. You have to let go. And I'll tell you, that was very hard for me in my journey of how, because of the fact that, in my life and how I grew up, like OCD was something I was diagnosed with years ago onto it, because of the fact that I didn't have a lot of control in my complete exterior world. I didn't have real control in my interior world, but the things that were right there within my arm's length had to be very much so in order into it. And if they didn't, nervous Megan, was who I was on that. I was a worry wart all the time. And I really had to learn how to give up that how. And I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life. Do I have everything I want right now? No. Is my life perfect? No. Do I have, personal issues and problems, with other people in my? Yes, I do. But I have the faith to know that I am aligned with who I am. I have stepped into my power. I have taken back my control. I am setting my decisions, and I am a fully functioning adult now. And so you have to do that. And it's amazing. It is amazing once you start to actually make decisions for yourself and stop leaving it up to just the universe to hand to you or to other people. You have to take back control. The first thing is you are priority. You are priority number one. And I know, as being a parent, that's hard because we think our children are our priority. They aren't. Your children are their own human beings. Our job is to teach them, but you can't give to your children from an empty cup. So you have to make yourself the priority, and sometimes does that mean, stepping aside, they want to do something, you need to go take a 5-minute mental break. You go take that 5-minute mental break and say, you know what? You give me 20 minutes, let me go do something for me right now. And your kids, what do you think that they learn by that? They learn the important value of taking 15-20 minutes to themselves. And we can't get mad when they turn around back on and do it to us, because I'll tell you, my kids do it to me all the time, and I'm like, all right, cool, go take your little break, go do what's good for you, because I'm teaching my kids that they're a priority, that their needs, their wants, and their desires are what is important, that they matter as human beings, and that is where we need to change our mindsets. We need to change our mindsets. And so if you're having problems trying to figure out how to become your priority, DM me Thrive. I have my Chaos to Peace. It's an 8-week program, and it's intense. You know, it's honestly, I'm not going to say that it's for the lighthearted, and that's not to push anyone away onto it, but real change can happen, and it can happen very quickly, and you can see dramatic changes within your life once you set your mind to it. And it's powerful, and it's beautiful, and it's eye-opening, and it is one of the greatest blessings in the world when that veil gets removed and you start seeing different things. You see different colors, you see different lights. It's no longer that black or white thinking, and you start to see the beauty. You know, you see the sky in different colors, you see the trees, you just see everything in such a prettier light. And so that is what I'm going to leave you guys with tonight. So, what decisions are you struggling with? What decisions are you not able to make? Why are you, you know, looking at other people to make your decisions for you and then getting mad at them when they don't work out because you didn't make that decision? And so I'd love to carry on the conversation. I'd love, you know, you guys can DM me, Thrive, to talk about mental health, mental wellness, and how to end the story of and then, and then, and then. So I hope you guys have a wonderful night. Namaste.